Hello everyone, and welcome to Navigating Uncharted Waters Part 2. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we are going to be talking about the supply chain. More specifically, who should you be connecting your digital islands to, and how should cybersecurity impact the decisions you make? Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ally Pinheiro, and I am the Enterprise Risk, Security, and Compliance Professional for Critical Ops. I am a risk researcher and cybersecurity compliance officer. I manage our own cybersecurity efforts, and I conduct cybersecurity assessments for other companies who may be looking to be compliant with NIST and CMMC, or maybe they just want to strengthen their overall security posture. Let's jump into the supply chain. We can define supply chain as a linked set of resources and processes. You can think of it as a chain itself. The first ring of the chain is the origin of a product or service, and the last ring of the chain is the consumer. Everything from the food we eat to our internet access has a supply chain. It includes vendors, manufacturers, distribution centers, and third-party support contractors. Let's look at an example. Let's pretend we want to buy honey. In the supply chain, we can start with the bee farm. The honey itself that is generated from the bee farm would be considered the raw materials. The honey and honeycomb are sent to the supplier, who may separate the two or begin creating different products that is used with the honey. The honey is then sent to the manufacturer, who packages the honey products, and then the distributor picks it up and brings it to the retailer. Finally, the consumer can buy the product. Realistically, the supply chain is much larger, because we want to consider where the bees are coming from, as well as the software that each entity uses along the way. It can be complicated, but don't let that deter you. Supply chain security is becoming a huge topic in cybersecurity because our adversaries are now moving to the supply chain for carrying out cyber attacks. Approximately 2/3 of breaches are a result of supplier or third-party vulnerabilities. Among these organizations, 75% of them believe that third-party cybersecurity incidents are increasing. In 2018 alone, 61% of U.S. companies did experience a breach caused by one of their vendors or third-party suppliers. And shockingly, 60% of organizations in the U.S. are now working with over 1,000 third parties. I'd like to go over some of the general supply chain risks before we jump into the cyber-specific risks, because they can be very important as well. Supply chain risk can be defined as the possibility that an adversary may sabotage or subvert a supply or system's design, integrity, manufacturing, production, distribution, installation, operation, and maintenance. The adversary may try to do this by inserting malware, directly disrupt the supply chain functions, steal information, or just to spy on the organization. When carrying out an attack, the adversary may look for a key vulnerability that we see in the supply chain. Anybody in your supply chain may allow a backdoor entry into your company's secure information. For example, say organization A outsources their IT. The IT organization that is outsourced has their own anti-malware software on Organization A's network. Organization A may give the IT organization access to their network, but what if the IT organization doesn't properly secure their own network? An adversary that gets into the IT organization's network may then be able to get into Organization A's network. The more complex your organization is, the more opportunities there are for an adversary to get in. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, commonly known as NIST, has provided a list of 6 common cybersecurity supply chain risks. The first one is compromised hardware. There have been some instances where somewhere along the supply chain, a phone or server may be rigged with some spyware. These can be hard to find, but I will give you some recommendations later in the video. Another risk is software security, such as using a software that has its own security vulnerabilities. Counterfeit hardware is also seen often. You may find a good deal on employee laptops through an off-brand organization or a seller on eBay, but they could be selling you counterfeit laptops. Technical weaknesses are another risk, such as weak passwords or insufficient security practices. Third parties with physical or virtual access, like I used in that IT organization example earlier. And lastly, supplier information security. Is your supplier protecting their own information? In reality, all end users are responsible for addressing these risks. We all have a responsibility to uphold security. Acquisition and procurement personnel are also key, which we'll talk about later. Legal advisors and technical subject matter experts are important in the process as well, because they will be able to spot hidden vulnerabilities that may lead to a supply chain attack. Before we jump into the strategies to preventing a supply chain attack, I want to walk through a real-world scenario. The Target breach in 2013 is a great example of a cyber supply chain attack, and I'd like to break it down for you so you can see how it all happened. The attack began on November 27, 2013, with a phishing attack on an HVAC contractor. A person in the HVAC organization opened and fell for a phishing email that led to the download of a malware known as Citadel. If you have heard of the Zeus baking Trojan, Citadel is a variant of it. Citadel captures keystrokes and takes screenshots of the victim's computer. Citadel went unnoticed because the HVAC company malware protection didn't offer a real-time protection option. The attackers worked very fast to move throughout the system, so the anti-malware software didn't catch it in time. The cyber criminals were able to get access to Target's system through a vendor portal, where they escalated their privileges and was able to infect the internal Windows file server. From here, they were able to find their way into the point of sale system and infected that with malware. The malware on the point of sale system scrapes the RAM to capture card numbers from swiped credit cards. The malware was pretty sophisticated. It actually looked at the local time on the point of sale system to see if it was between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. If it was during those hours, the information would be sent to an internal server owned by Target. This data was then very slowly moved to another server located in Russia. The exfiltrated data was moved slowly to prevent Target's security system from detecting a huge influx of abnormal traffic. Target discovered the breach about a month later and notified the U.S. Justice Department on December 13, 2013. 2 days later, a forensics team mitigated the attack. Target had to pay about $18.5 million in settlements. In total, the cyber attack affected over 41 million payment card accounts and was a huge factor in propelling the addition of chips and credit cards. So what could Target have done to protect the attack? Since the contractor did have access into Target's network, they could have required endpoint protection in the contract and conduct regular audits on the HVAC organization. They could have also paid for licenses of anti-malware software for any endpoints that had access to the portal. Another defense would be requiring two-factor authentication, especially for accounts that have access to sensitive information like customer accounts. I want to now dive into some of the things you can do to prevent a supply chain attack. Documentation is always my favorite place to start because it can lead to discovering some new vulnerabilities. Start with asset management. You want to write down all products, subcomponents, and software services you are using to help you manage risk and mitigate any security compromises. When you document these assets, you want to include the source, version, and build to make sure that you are keeping up to date on your software. It's also helpful to have this information handy so that if a security incident does happen, you can provide this to the forensics team instead of scrambling around to find them all on each device. If any vendors do have access to your systems, even if it's a portal like in the Target breach, document their access and review it regularly. If you notice any abnormal logins, you may be experiencing a security breach. Also, make sure you include supply chain risks in your response and remediation plan. If a supply chain attack were to hit your organization, do you know how you will respond? How are you going to remediate any risks? A good habit when deciding on a product or service is to conduct some reconnaissance on the organization prior to purchasing. You can use multiple sources of intelligence, such as talking to your business partners about their experiences, looking on the web for reviews, and consulting legal or cybersecurity teams. Something to look for would be to look into their investors and background. How were they founded? Do they have any suspicious investors? I know it's a pain, but read through the terms and conditions before signing up. It's very important to understand what your responsibilities are in the event of a security incident. You want to make sure that the company is also following best practices in supply chain management, which may not be in the terms and conditions, but may require a conversation with representatives at the organization. These conversations and terms should be shared with a specialized attorney to understand what you will be responsible for in the event of an attack. If you can, evaluate their supply chain. You won't be able to do it as extensively as you can for your organization, but a secure company should be willing to share their security practices with you. We do all of these whenever we recommend software or solutions, during assessments or cloud migrations, or even on an ad hoc basis for companies we are working with. Often, we will read through the terms and conditions for our clients and give them a one-pager on what they should know regarding cybersecurity. For all employees, it's important to conduct phishing training. If you missed our first video in this series about phishing training, you should go back and watch it. I want to stress just how important it is. I haven't yet seen this in phishing training, but when I review our clients' trainings, I always recommend that you incorporate the supply chain into phishing training. You want your employees to be on the lookout for a vendor or third party that may have had their emails compromised. If you notice that a vendor is reaching out about information that may be sensitive, it's a good practice to verify it was coming from them in another way, like through a phone call. You also want to train your acquisition and procurement personnel on supply chain risks and basic cybersecurity related topics. By training them on cybersecurity, they will be able to recognize supply chain risks and the terms and conditions that could easily be glossed over. Lastly, make sure you are conducting risk and red teaming exercises to make sure your team will know how to respond to a supply chain attack. These can be done through tabletop exercises or our Marco program, which helps you identify your response and mitigation vulnerabilities. There are a few things you can do prior to signing a contract. We recommend establishing transparency with the vendor when it comes to data. If they have access to any of your data, ask them what exactly they will be able to access. You can ask who has access to it and how it will be used. It's also important to establish a contact with each organization in your supply chain in the event a security incident occurs. That way, if there is a breach, you will know who to contact. The list should be updated regularly to make sure the contacts you have are still employed with the organization. Ask your contact if your organization is part of their disaster recovery plan. If they experience a breach, are they going to contact you? There should be a notification agreement that provides communication between stakeholders of the supply chain. This typically is in the purchase contract, so if you don't see it, you may want to ask. The vendor should realistically be open about these things, but the acquirer of the product must also be diligent in asking for this information. A great practice is to give all your vendors conditional trust. Instead of trusting them from their terms and conditions or from what their representatives are saying, start with little trust in them and require that they gain your trust. Look for proof that they are serious about security. Your organization is only as secure as its weakest link. If there is a vulnerability in the supply chain, it can fall back on you, just like it did with Target. Bring your own device policies are actually a huge part of supply chain risk. It's important to be cautious when using personal devices at work. You may not know what is preloaded on a device. In 2008, the Department of Defense was actually hacked by a worm installed on an employee's flash drive, which was purchased from a local kiosk and brought to work. Similar things can happen with mobile devices and smart devices. Smart devices, such as IoT devices, are not always created with security in mind. Oftentimes, they have software with vulnerabilities that can be exploited. They are not always patched to cover these vulnerabilities. By connecting an item to the internet, an employee or organization may unknowingly download malware, which can then be programmed to spread to other devices or collect information about the internal network. With every new device, the potential for exposure increases. Some examples of smart devices include health devices like heart rate monitors, smart TVs, cloud-based security devices, and thermostats that you can control from your phone. Any smart device that you want to invest in should be approached from a cybersecurity perspective. We've previously helped clients with selecting IoT devices to make sure they won't be putting their customers' data at risk or creating vulnerabilities along their supply chain. Another helpful thing you can start doing is conducting and implementing threat intelligence. This can help catch malware, track data exfiltration, and unauthorized access. This can be done through continuous monitoring, which we do offer that comes with monthly or quarterly security reports and offers real-time detection, which Target's HVAC supplier did not have. Lastly, incorporate cybersecurity into all phases of your programs and projects. Every program or project should be approached with a cybersecurity mindset, especially if it can result in a data breach. A good practice, especially with vendors, is to use the principle of least privilege. This means that each person's access is limited to only what they need to have access to when it comes to doing their job. Conducting penetration tests and cybersecurity assessments are also crucial to finding vulnerabilities in your own network. In our customized cybersecurity maturity assessment, we consider cybersecurity vulnerabilities along the supply chain. You can also implement honeypots around your network to trap any malicious actors. These are essentially vulnerable areas with false documents that would attract a hacker. It would give you the ability to watch what the attackers are doing. This is quite sophisticated and can be difficult to implement and maintain, so make sure you connect with us prior to establishing it. On your equipment, you can run vulnerability assessments to determine any openings that would allow an adversary access. Earlier, I mentioned that hardware may be equipped with spyware before it even gets to you. It's important to analyze every piece of technology that comes into your organization to make sure it hasn't been tampered with. You can physically analyze the device and perform a factory reset. I have a few more general tips to help you secure your supply chain. First, only purchase software in its standard configurations. Custom configurations can get confusing and keep you open to vulnerabilities that the standard configurations would cover. Secondly, turn a negative into a positive. Instead of viewing endpoints as a liability, view them as a tool that can detect and respond to security events. Use them to your advantage to identify security events before they turn into a breach. Lastly, try to only make purchases from vendors that have been vetted and approved. The U.S. government has a marketplace called Fedramp that is essentially a database for cloud solutions that emphasize security. You may have heard of CMMC, which is the Department of Defense's newer set of standards that government contractors must now follow if they will be working with controlled unclassified information. We do have a CMMC readiness program that can be paired with our cloud transition services to make sure your organization can securely transition to the cloud. All of our recommendations come directly from Fedramp to uphold your cybersecurity. This picture may be a bit hard to see, but you can search for products on Fedramp for a ton of different solutions to suit your business needs. You can find this database at marketplace.fedramp.gov. We have one more video in our series, Navigating Uncharted Waters. This one is called Digital Rescue, and we'll be talking about what actions you can take following a breach. We will also be discussing some important topics that can help you bounce back after a cyber attack, such as backing up your data regularly. If you're feeling overwhelmed with cybersecurity or simply want an outside perspective, we do offer free consultations to improve your cybersecurity. You can reach out to us through our website, www.criticalops.com, or through my email here. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope to see you in the next video.